Good morning and happy Saturday, everyone. Welcome back. So, I feel like I want to have a champagne glass to talk about this topic with no champagne in it necessarily, but just like for the look of it. Because I would like to think that mental illness or even talking about mental illness openly is something that everyone can do. But I think that is something that is easier done. Should I say easier or more prevalent amongst people of elite status? I have to just put that out there. Let's just get started. Let's just throw it out there, right? I think people who are higher educated, who are of a certain socioeconomic status, understand the importance of, first of all, being self-aware. Second of all, understanding that mental illness is something that impacts everyone. No one is immune, right? And they are just comfortable talking about it, right? It's not something that is as stigmatized. I'm not going to say that doesn't carry a certain degree of stigmatization amongst the elite, but I would say it's not as stigmatized. Elite people talk about a variety of topics, right? Politics, mental health, mental illness, physical illness, right? And what the research shows and what I've noticed through observation, naturalistic observation, is that people are very comfortable talking about their physical ailments, right? They have a toothache, they have body pain, body ache, headache, whatever it may be physically, they feel very comfortable talking about that. But when it comes to their own psychological symptoms related to corresponding to a certain mental diagnosis, they're hush hush about it. Why the stigma, though? Why is there so much stigma surrounding talking about mental illness, let alone mental illness in and of itself, right? There's stigma surrounding just mental illness, right? Depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD. The list goes on. Alcohol abuse, substance abuse, chemical dependency, paraphilias. There's so much stigma surrounding just the mental illness. Then of course there will be stigma when it comes to talking about these things. People fear judgment. They fear they're going to be perceived in a negative perspective, in a negative light. They're going to be looked at differently. And if you're looked at differently, then you're treated differently. Right? People fear rejection, being outcast, being considered different or against the norm, abnormal. People fear the label crazy. First and foremost, they don't want to be perceived as crazy. If you're crazy, then what? You're considered weak, incapable of being able to take care of yourself, to navigate the world, to exist in the world just as everyone else is able to exist. If you're perceived as crazy, you're not able to hold a job or have relationships, effective relationships. And I think all of this really is, it can be true, but a lot of this is myth, right? It's an assumption. When in fact, there are so many people who are very good at masking their mental illness. That's something I want to talk about. This video is very in-depth, very dynamic, because I'm going to cover many different areas as it relates to mental illness. Even speaking from my own personal perspective related to my personal journey, my family dynamic, what I've observed as a therapist and a psychologist over the years. We have a lot to talk about here in this video, and I welcome you guys to just chime in as you may, as you feel comfortable, right? I know that, and I recognize many different people have varying levels of comfortability when it comes to talking about any topic, right? For that matter. Now we're talking about mental illness. And it's not easy. So I'm not going to try to throw it out there to say, oh, well, it's just as easy as 1, 2, 3 talking about it. I would say it's easy for me because I am very attuned to who I am and my perspective and relationship with the outside world, right? Like, I know who I am. I know my purpose in life. And so I don't feel threatened by talking about my mental illness, because I just, like, when you have a certain sense of security and assurance of who you are in this world, it's like you feel like untouched, right? Untouchable in a sense, right? Not that I can't be touched, but you just feel like you have the power, you have the ability to be yourself, to walk around in the world, to navigate the world, to interact with people in your true self and who you are. And the universe will protect you, right? This force beyond yourself will protect you. That's how I feel. I've always carried that feeling, right? So for me, opening up and expressing who I am, I feel very comfortable doing that. However, yes, I've experienced ridicule in doing so. And I've given this example before. When I first started my doctoral studies out in Los Angeles, California, I remember very vividly how, and it's funny because I wrote this in my book, right? I wrote this actually as I was putting together my website to promote my book, and I made the statement that my book, Dying to Submit, which is autobiographical, fictional, related to my experience with BDSM, my stepping into the world of BDSM as a submissive masochist. I predicted, I knew this was going to happen, that me writing this, Dying to Submit, wasn't going to be well received, right? There was going to be some opposition, especially in the field of academia. It's like it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, I saw it, I spoke it, and then it happened, right? I wrote the book back in 2014, and I created the website back then, and I made that prediction back then, right? And then I began my doctoral studies in 2016, and lo and behold, it's like my colleagues, my classmates discovered that I'm a writer. No surprise though, because I have an email address that has the word author in it, right? Author, my first initial, right? D of my first name, and my last name, Leach, Author D. Leach. And so I would use that email to communicate to people within academia, and they would harp on me about, oh, you should use your professional email address. And I'm just like, no, I'm going to use my permanent email address. Author D. Leach is my permanent email address. I still use it. And like I said, I got a lot of flack from professors. Oh, we can't respond to you if you're using this, whatever. But it just goes to show, like, I guess from me using that, then they found out about it. But I think they would have found out about my website anyway, because, like, part of, you know the experience in college, right? You're in class and you're discussing certain topics, and some of the topics they kind of want to delve a little bit on the surface or maybe below the surface about who you are, and you share, parts of yourself, not your entire life story, but, who you are. And of course, like I said, I feel very comfortable, so I would share that, I like to write, and I expressed, interest in BDSM when I was there, and I guess people just want to find out who is this person. They Googled me and found my website, and finding my website, they were, I guess, alarmed, taken aback, and then they notified the administration of what they saw on my website, and I didn't think it was anything bizarre. They're like, oh my gosh. What they saw was simply my writings, and of course, this BDSM erotica, pretty explicit, very detailed, descriptive writings, and it's in first person, but I have to reiterate that it's fictional, right? Or autobiographical fiction. It's based on a true story, but with the twist, right? Fictional twist to it. Fueled by my own creative, imaginative juices. So it's like seeing that it was written in first person, or like, oh my gosh, how can you put this out there like this? Like, aren't you ashamed to share this with the world? I'm just like, what's wrong with y'all? But I get it. I had lived, like, prior to me entering my doctoral studies, like, I had completed a master's program in New York at Long Island University, and just living in New York, period, before going out to LA. New York, anybody know New York before the pandemic, right? New York is and it's kind of getting back that way. Interesting enough, I was speaking with a colleague at my workplace, and he was saying how a friend of his is complaining about, oh, New York isn't the same. I guess it's different, obviously. Every place is going to be different due to the pandemic. But thinking back how New York was, just the spirit of New York is very inviting, welcoming. You get to be yourself, right? It's like it's reinforced. Being original, being unique, just being your own identity, right? Being comfortable in who you are is actually a praise, or it's praise. People respect that about people here, and I think it helped for me to just delve deeper into my exploration in the world of BDSM, and to express that publicly. And so going to LA, people look at LA as like a baby New York. Like, it welcomes cultural diversity and uniqueness. And it's like, okay, maybe in certain parts of LA it does, right? I was living in Hollywood, California in my first 2 years when I moved to LA for my doctoral studies. And then I ended up moving to South Central LA the final 2 years. But I find it interesting to see within the world of academia, especially within psychology, people are like repulsed at the idea of BDSM or S&M, and I just I wrestled with that for a while, right? It's like when you're in it, it's a different experience when you're being judged by people who proclaim, right? They promote themselves as understanding people, understanding of human behavior, and non-judgmental, yet they're the worst critics of human behavior, right? Or the biggest critics, shall I say. So I went through that, like, that was like my welcoming and to that program, having to go to meetings, and I feel like not really having to justify my behavior, myself, or my identity, but just having to explain it so they understand it, I guess. That was kind of awkward. I had to meet with my advisor, who later became my dissertation chair, and, just talking about that. So I say that to say that, yes, BDSM is a very niche type of community and behavioral kind of characteristics. Given that it's very niche, is people look at it as more of a prescriptive kind of illness or issue, problem, They project their own biases and assumptions or presumptions on what BDSM is and what certain activities are, and the people who actually practice these things, they form these preconceived notions or prejudices against that, and that kind of ties into a stigmatization of behavior, which oftentimes they perceive as mental illness, because there is a section in the DSM, our Bible, that we use to formulate diagnoses of people with mental illness. There's a section related to paraphilias, right? Sexually, supposedly inappropriate behaviors or abnormal behaviors, and S&M is in there. S&M is in there, right? Sadomasochism. It's just like, so that is an example, and I've mentioned this before, of how, you know, even amongst professionals, there is a lot of stigmatization when it comes to certain aspects of mental health, and that's just sexual, right? Not to even mention just general mental health, right? Your typical classical prevalent diagnoses like anxiety and depression and panic disorder, you know, is people still find it difficult to talk openly about that. Even if it relates to them, right? It's just like, it's a secret. But I feel very comfortable. So my journey in studying psychology began back in 2002, actually, when I graduated from high school, went directly into college, got a chance to experience the whole college life, living on campus and all of that. And my major initially was computer science, right? And I took computer programming classes because I'm like, I was going to be this computer geek and make a whole bunch of money, right? But then, yeah, I lost interest because it became so, like, monotonous, and it was very routine. It was just, I felt like it was no spunk, no liveliness in studying computer science, or doing the computer programming classes. So I changed my major to psychology, and I remember the spark I felt in taking intro to psychology my freshman year. I think it was like my second semester in college. I had a great professor exploring the different theoretical concepts and the theorists, and it's like life began to make more sense, right? You're like, oh, that's why, right? It's like psychology is a very comforting field of study. At least for me, it was when I first got introduced to it, and it still is. Because, yeah, it begins to kind of fill in the dots of, oh, okay. Because sometimes life can be a big puzzle, especially growing up, right? And people oftentimes, like I said, aren't honest, which I'm going to probably say this pretty frequently throughout the video. How, you know, people give the facade like their life is perfect, nothing wrong. When in fact, you know, we live in a very complex, dynamic, toxic society, number one. And there's many different layers to that, right? Starting at the smallest layer, or the most intimate layer, the microsystem within the family dynamic, and then outside of that, there's religion, church, and school. You know, there's politics, there's law, there's media, and you look at those different systems, those different layers of influence over us as individuals. It begins to make sense how and why these disturbances happen within us, right? Just seeing how we are shaped over time. And so it raises the question as, how can a person be so confident or so arrogant to deny the reality of mental illness or mental disturbance, or whatever you want to call it, within their own lives, when we live in this type of society, right? Where there's murder, there's sexual abuse, physical assault, you know, one out of two marriages and divorce, broken families, right? All of us are impacted by all these different remnants of psychological dysfunction that impacts our society at large. And so it makes you wonder, right, when people present themselves as like, well, of course we have to, right? This facade, this representative that we carry, and it's really a heavy burden to carry when you think about it, because you're presenting yourself one way to the world, and really, you know, when you're behind closed doors, another face of you reveals itself, right? It is what it is. But like I said, I've always felt comfortable sharing, like, who I am, and not even just me, but like my family dynamics, the family I grew up in. I actually was born to a two-parent household. My mom and my father raised me. They were married when I was conceived and brought into this world. I am the only child of my mother and my father. I am the youngest child of both of them put together. Given that my mom already had my older sister from a different partner before she met my dad. My dad had my other 6 siblings from his first marriage. But I am the only child and the youngest of my mother and my father. It was a very interesting dynamic of a family that I was raised in, given that it was a combined family, right, with, children from one kind of nuclear family combined with children from other, my dad's family that he created with his first wife. We were kind of raised in the same household. It was me, my older sister from my mom, and then me and my older brother and sister from my dad with his first wife. His first wife was already out the picture. She was passed away, and it's a mystery how she passed away, but that's a different story. So I thought that my family was like the perfect family, right? Until something happened. It was a shift, big shift in my life when I was 12 years old. My mom made the final decision and I've told this story before, to pack up and to go on by her merry way, and separate from my dad. Now, my mom still legally carries my dad's last name. She still legally carries it, right? I guess that's her commitment. That's like her commitment to the relationship when you think about it. Like, she's just like, I tried kind of thing. Who knows what other reasons are associated with it. I think I know, but I'm not going to verbalize that here. But more so like entitlement and things like that. And so she, 12 years old, and that situation was like, it was very shocking to me, right? It was very tragic, traumatic. It was a disruption, right, in our family dynamic. And I've always wondered, like, you grow up as children and you're like, and there's separation, right, between your parents, especially at teenage years, like, freaking teenager. Granted, this was the last and final straw. So my mom took me and my sister and away from my biological father a few times before the last and final straw when I was 12 years old. This was in 1996. And it wasn't long term though. Like, it was a very short, brief kind of separation. And she would come right back, right? She would leave and go stay with her friend's house, and we stayed in the projects. It was like around the corner from my mom and dad's house. She had a friend who lived in the projects, but my mom couldn't bear the gunshots, and we had, like, I can't make this up, get down on the floor and shit when people were outside shooting. And so she couldn't bear that. That was much different than the safety and comfort of living with a man in a house compared to living in project apartment housing when there's a lot of shit happening on the outside. So that was a very brief separation. I remember I was like in elementary school. Another one was when she took us, she picked me and my sister up early from school. And I'm like, what the fuck? What's happening? And it's just like going to, she picked us up and we went to Tampa to live with two of my mom's family members on my mom's side. And that was very brief. That was like for a few months, right? And then the school year ended. And then we came right back. And then the age of 12 years old came around, and me and my sister were playing outside, and then all of a sudden, a neighborhood friend, one of our childhood friends, was like, Danielle, he called my sister's name and said, your mom said come home, and we're looking like, the street lights, the street lights are not on, right? That was our cue to come home. We know we had to be home when the street lights came on. Think about that. That does tie back to some fucking Jim Crow shit. Because black people, during that period, we were allowed to be outside. And I know it seems like I take forever to kind of tell a story, but all of this is part of it, right? All of this is like, for me, is substance. But yeah, so I would imagine that's where she got that idea from. And so yeah, we're like, what the hell? What's happening? Knew something wasn't right, and then yeah, she was like, pack your bags. We get in the house. She was like, pack your bags and get out of here. She's just yelling. The way I recall my mom, right? And both of my parents are still alive, by the way. My mom is 68. My dad is 80, and I'm 38. So my parents had me when they were relatively older. My mom was 30. My dad was 42. And so I recall my mom just being very unsettled as a person. That's a nice way of putting it, right? Very unsettled, very like, I guess now that I have the terminology for it, and that's another thing I think, an inhibiting factor of why mental health or mental illness is so stigmatized, because people don't have the language, the terminology to talk about it, right? Let alone the comfortability and security and feeling safe to talk about it. They just lack the language. And so when I decided to, change my major to psychology during my freshman year of college, I was 18 years old. Like, I was happy because I'm learning these concepts and theories and terminology, like ways of being able to talk about these things that I saw in my own life, right? And so, yeah, she was very like dysregulated and manic. Like, I just remember mom just going on and on for hours, and just it's just like, imagine like being her partner, a husband to that, and having to listen. And I know this is not uncommon. A lot of men complain about women just talk, right? And even research shows that women, we use way more words, right? We produce way more words a day. Like, I forget the number, thousands of fucking words a day compared to men. Men, y'all only talk when I guess it's necessary, when it comes to like solving a problem or something. But women, we're very expressive. But yeah, she was, yeah. And it was something more than just the factor of her being a woman, right? Given that that's common amongst women to just be verbally expressive. But yeah, it was something, I knew it was something else there, because after the separation, I'm being transparent. I think this is a treat for you guys, which I've kind of shared bits and pieces. I've kind of like slid in like other video topics, but I have yet to really do a full, I guess, expose. Which I don't think anything really is a full expose, right? You will never know everything about a person, right? You may know some things, but people always hold secrets and are very strategic about what they choose to share, believe it or not, even though it may seem like I'm being very transparent and freestyling it. No, I'm always strategic, whether consciously, purposefully doing it or subconsciously doing it. So I noticed certain things like about my mom. So I was 12 years old when she took me and my sister abruptly from my father, and we moved to her hometown of St. Augustine, Florida, to live with her mom and her sister, my grandmother and my aunt. And of course my aunt had kids, had children too. So my mom had me and my sister, her sister had two, and then she ended up having a third. And then it was my grandmother. So count how many people were living in a 3-bedroom, old-ass shack of a house. Wooden, old school wooden house in St. Augustine, Florida, right? And I wrote about this, right, in my book, American Dreamer, my autobiography, which I'm going to release. It's happening. It's a matter of time. I know I keep saying I'm going to release it. I think for me, it has to be right. Everything has to be right timing. It has to be, if I'm going to self-publish it, which I kind of think, I want to self-publish it, given that there are benefits to that with more creative control. But then the drawback is like, I am concerned about the quality of the paper, right? And I tell this to authors, given that I have my own literary organization where I coach authors on tips, publish their book, and promoting their book. And I used to review books in my early days of my literary organization called UBAWA. For you guys don't know, it's an acronym. It's actually Swahili for wing, but it stands for Urban Books, Authors and Writers of America. I used to do a lot of book reviews. And authors would send me their books, and I never had to purchase a book. Purchase a book? I find it funny when authors like try to sell me their book. Like, do you not know who the fuck I am? But anyway, so I used to review books a lot, and you know, it's still on the table, right? People know that they can submit books, but you know, I have other things, you know, to do on my plate. And so I remember just like, and I still have these books. I want to do probably a separate video on like all these books that I've reviewed, right? Just show you guys. I did a whole video on my DVD collection, so I may show you guys like my book collection, but it's pretty expansive. And just looking at the paper, right? You can tell a self-published book from a book that was published by a traditional, one of the big 5 publishers here in New York. You can tell it's like the paper quality is different, the weight of the paper is different, the texture, all that shit, right? The formatting of the book, right? The margins, the everything, the ink, the cover, the texture of the cover of the book. Just as you can tell, and for me, like, I'm very meticulous about those details. And when my name is being put on a book and being put out for the masses, I just want it to be done right. So that's like a big factor holding me back. Yeah, it just got to be done right, from the actual publishing of the book, right? The manufacturing of the book itself, the product, the packaging of it, and also promoting it. Like, it got to be done right, yo. And I also delayed it because when I wrote my book, it was back in 2009. This was during the recession, economic recession, when Obama, right? This is the Obama term, beginning. Shit was rough. It was a struggle phase for me, big time, yo. I'm going to come back around to that too, to talk about how this ties into mental health. Everything is related in my mind, right? I know it sounds like it's just like not related, but everything it ties in together. We're talking about my book, my autobiography, American Dreamer. And I wrote that back in 2009. I was going to publish it back in 2010. And then I got this, like, a warning message from my sister saying people in my family were threatening, right? Because they had seen excerpts from my book posted. And they're like, oh, that's how you get sued. So I was like, okay, I want to be strategic about it. Granted, no names are revealed in my book. I know how to protect myself, right? And the confidentiality of other people as well. But yeah, so that was 2010, right? When I finished writing that book, and it was slated for release. However, right, we're in 2022, so imagine, right, the amount of content that's happened since then that, you know, I want to also include. And it's not a tell-all book, right? It's not an expose necessarily, but it kind of is. Like, it reveals a part of me, my experience in navigating this world in American society, hence the name American Dreamer. Sometimes it can be a misnomer, because the title can be a misnomer because people think that, I don't want to give too much of it away, right? But I know people, just by reading the title, they think one thing about the book. They think that, okay, this is the kind of meaning of it, when really it's something else. It's one of those books, right? I can say that it's very politically driven, and it's a powerful book. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming. So things I'm talking about here, I've written about in my book, or, you know, I'm going to add to my book. It's not really new information per se, but some of it may be, the depth of which I speak about certain things may be relatively new to you guys. And so I saw certain, like, characteristics in my mom with her expressions, right? Where it would, like, you can't forget shit like this. You just can't forget, right? It's just like ingrained in you. where, and this is after her separation from my dad. Granted, I saw this growing up too when we were all living happy family together with my dad. She would just go on and on and on and on, but then it became even more apparent when she separated, and like she would wake us up. And my sister just out of nowhere, early freaking morning, 5 o'clock. My mom wake up early as shit. She worked at a hospital as a nurse assistant, and it would be over the most menial things. A comb. Where is my comb? My comb, my comb. It was just like, yo, we sleeping. Now we're in school, okay? 12 years old, I was in middle school, 7th grade, or entering 7th grade, right? I lived with my mom. My mom, like, raised me, I guess, as a single mother, but I don't know, it was like more like co-parenting, because I would go to my dad and stay at his place too. Which was only like 30 minutes away. But that period was from age 12 to age 16. And then at 16, I ran away from my mom's place. And then I moved back in with my dad. Me and my dad, we like colluded together and planned my escape from my mom. That's a different story. But no, it's still related. And so, yeah, it was like she would just wake me and my sister up 5 o'clock in the morning. She'd get up early as shit, just starting shit. My mom was known to be like just the crazy lady, right? It's just the sleeping giant. Don't wake up the sleeping giant, because when she gets started, it's just like you're gonna hear her for a long, and she goes on and on. And I come to realize, just reflecting back, like, yo, my mom, that's mania. That's clearly mania, right? And I do think this, like, mental illness is inherited, right? So I can't deny that I have, certain traits, right? Characteristics that my mom has, because I see it in myself too. And it's funny how, like, the more we say we don't want to be like our parents, the more we become like them, yo. And I see that in myself. I see it's more prevalent, especially in, like, interpersonal relationships. That's when these behavior characteristics really rear their ugly heads, like in the intimacy of relationships. And so, because that's, I guess, when you feel most safe, right? Just to be yourself. And so, yeah, the comb, just, where's my comb? Literally come in the room, turn the light, and like force me and my sister to get up and help her look for a comb. And the comb will always be where? On her dresser, just sitting there. So it never was about the comb. And when it comes to like assessing mental illness, I feel like I'm pretty good at it, because I've been around it, right? When you've been exposed to something, different variations, right, of human behavior, and they call it abnormalities, but when you think about it, shit is really more normal than it is abnormal, because it's seen in a lot of people, millions of people. People just do a good job sometimes at suppressing it, right, or trying to hide it, but it's there. And so I can see it, even when it is people trying to hide it. It's like, you know it, right? When you know something, you just know it, right? It's something you can feel. It's like racism, right? A person don't have to tell you they're racist, but you just feel it, like, instinctively, like an animalistic feeling, right? Like you can smell fear, like dogs can smell fear. And so, yeah, that shit was annoying, having to get up. And it was like every other morning. Help my mom look for a comb, but it's never about the comb. It's just like about, she feels uneasy. And like they say often, they joke about this in mental health, sharing is caring. So people who have like psychological disturbances, they share them with other people. They just can't keep it to themselves. Like, other people you can feel it, right? You can feel when a person suffers from a illness, a mental illness, because they're around people and they share the love. They spread it, right? They're going to make you feel what they feel. So if they feel unsettled, disturbed, you're going to feel that way. And yeah, it was just like, oh my gosh, that shit was annoying. And that would like be in the morning, and then just like throughout the day, like something can trigger my mom, and she would just go off to the point where her going off is just like talking really loud and just continually, like it doesn't stop. Well, it stops eventually, right? So I guess neurologically she's gotten her fix, because it is a neurological basis to mania. And I said this recently where I work. I'm a psychologist with the state in a psychiatric facility. And of course, we treat people who have severe mental illness. And I can't even front. There is a patient there who reminds me of my mom. He has these moments where he goes on these episodes of, like, people will call it rambling, but he's just like talking really loud, and something can trigger him, and he's just going off and yelling and nah, 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 nah. It's just like all these kind of loose associations, right? Just ramble. And we did something different this time. Usually, like, people like intervene, and sometimes that triggers him, escalates even more, right? And then we don't want to put hands on. I don't do that. I don't like to put hands on, even though that's part of my job to restrain. But I never liked that. Even when I worked in the lockdown residential facility with children, never liked doing that. And I really didn't do it, right? My role was just to document. Like, I'll document, y'all do that, right? But like, there is a protocol for when patients become a danger to themselves or other people, and it can escalate. But interesting enough, when that episode happened most recently, it was just like we just kind of let them be. Just because, come to find out, when people are disturbed, right, and they're going off like that, sometimes people can solve their own problems, right? Just time. As long as they're not hurting anyone else or danger, it's just like kind of let that person ramble and talk loud and get whatever they have to get out, and then they get it out, and it's just like they calm down, and that's exactly what happened. But like I said, he reminds me of my mom, because my mom would do the exact same thing. Now, she doesn't do it now. She's gotten, she's much older. I don't think she has the energy to do that. But this was the days when she had like all this energy to just, y'all. And so, yes, I say that I see her reflection in me. I've seen that in my interpersonal relationship. In separate relationships with men, I see it manifest, right? Where, yes, I have my moments. I'm very self-aware of when these episodes happen. And going back to the 2009 hustle phase, the recession phase, when times were hard, right? That's more about this in my book, right? Some things there's just a designated time to talk about more in depth, so you guys can understand the context. But yeah, I was going through something significantly. I can say that, yeah, I was affected in the way of feeling depressed. And I said this before, where I had times where I just did not feel like getting out of bed. I didn't get out of bed, right? It's one thing to not feel like getting out of bed. A lot of us feel that way, especially when it comes to getting up early in the morning, go to work. A lot of us have that feeling we don't feel like getting out of bed. But there were times where, a lot of times, there's a period of time actually where not only did I not feel like getting out of bed, I did not get out of bed, right? And then it would carry over to the next day. And it's like, you have intentions, right? You tell yourself, okay, I'm not getting out of bed today, but I'm going to get out of bed tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, and then, all right, well, I didn't get out of bed today or yesterday. I'm going to get out of bed tomorrow, right? Same thing happens, right? Okay, fuck it. Already 3 days straight, I didn't get out of bed this week. Next week, I'm getting out of bed, yo. I'm going to get out of bed next week, right? Next week comes, shit don't happen, right? I went through a whole period of time where, yes, I was fucking, they will call it significant clinical depression, where I wasn't getting out of bed. So if you're not getting out of bed, you're not doing your hygiene. You're not really eating. You're not washing your ass. You're not brushing your teeth. You're not taking care of yourself. I went through that. And I was recommended to see a therapist. Was diagnosed with depression was prescribed antidepressants. I took them. I don't even think I've said this before. So you guys who made it this far, it's a treat for you. I feel like me being honest and self-disclosing certain aspects of my experience is motivating. That's the reason why I do it. It's helpful. I'm a reflection of you guys, right? We're all each other's reflection because we're all human. And I think a big part of the stigmatization of mental illness is people don't talk about it. They don't feel comfortable talking about it. They think that they're alone, and you're not alone. Like, so many people go through the same thing. Shit. If not all of us, a significant portion of us, right? Majority of us. But some people just don't feel comfortable talking about it. And then people don't get help, right? They don't know how to get help. They feel ashamed and all these other negative emotions that come to surface. But yeah, I was prescribed antidepressant. I took them. I hated it. I didn't like that. I felt out of body. I'm like, this isn't helping me. Because I'm very attuned to reality and myself. The depression is supposed to inhibit the reuptake of serotonin in your brain so that the serotonin stays within the synaptic gaps of your certain part of your brain so that it decreases those feelings, right, of hopelessness and sadness. And it's supposed to help you feel good, motivate you. And I know they said it takes like 3-4 weeks for you have to take it. You can't. It's not gonna like one pill and boom, you get an immediate effect. You have to take it for a certain period of time. And then I was like, fuck this, right? Like, just common sense should tell you. Because sometimes people don't use common sense, right? But common sense should tell you if you're taking something. And even though they recommend, okay, you should take it 3 to 4 weeks before you see the effect of the drug. But if you're like, let's say on week 1, 2, and you're feeling out of body, out of touch, it's like, nah, you can like tell that shit is changing your fucking brain chemistry. Hell nah. I didn't feel safe. And so I quit taking it abruptly, and I became violent and hostile. Now, that's a no-go, right? You don't quit. All the medications you're not supposed to quit abruptly. You're supposed to like kind of taper down. They tell you that. I knew this, of course, because during 2009, I already had my bachelor's degree in psychology and was working on a master's. So they tell you this. I knew this, right? And you can fucking Google it yourself, but it's just like, I did that and I saw the change, right? So yes, mental illness has a neurobiopsychological component to it, right? It's not just, oh, I feel sad or I have low energy and lack of motivation and feel hopeless. It's, you feel those symptoms, those characteristics as a result of a chemical imbalance in your body and in your brain. And that's the point of the psychopharmacology of it, is to tweak the chemistry, right, of your brain. I get that, right? And I'm not here to say, okay, I'm opposed to psychotropic medications altogether, but cautious, right? So I feel comfortable in myself and in my experience to be able to share that here openly, publicly. And I feel like, what the hell, right? There are people that say, oh, well, you shouldn't talk about that, you shouldn't share that because people are going to look at you a certain way. Some people even risk losing their jobs, especially me being a psychologist. Like, oh, people look at you like you're crazy, like you're unfit. But I know who I am. I know my purpose in life. And I know that this is just how I see it. Like, we are here on this earth for a specified period of time. Our days are numbered, okay? So when you know that you're called to do something, you have a purpose, you know who you are, you're comfortable in who you are, you just be that. You don't care about outside forces necessarily, right? It's just like, whatever. People do that. You do you. And so I've always rest in that confidence, and just being myself and going with the wind. And I've always been protected. But mental illness is serious, and I feel like we should have more talks about it. It's unfortunate though when people, especially celebrities, and we have different examples of that. Kanye, you know, there are people whose lives are public, right? It's hard for them to hide, certain aspects of themselves, especially when it comes to their mental well-being, mental illness. So it's out there. And, of course, he's had his moments, he had his breaks, and people laugh at a person crying. Like, that's how it becomes stigmatized. And instead of people looking at the laughter as problematic, they look at him talking about his illness and crying publicly as problematic. So that's how you know something isn't right. It's just not right. Now, of course, we know there's a space and time to get treatment for it. Talking about mental illness publicly is not necessarily a cry for help. I think sometimes people look at it in that way. Like, oh, they're just crying for help or seeking attention, or they're wanting the public to treat them. No. They just want to share. Just like you talk about your perspective on any different other issue that's happening, right? That affects humanity. The war. There's a war in Ukraine, right? Russia has attacked Ukraine. People talk about that on a regular basis, right? But when it comes to our mental health, and especially how societal enforces negatively impact our mental health, it's just like how certain developmental life experiences have impacted our mental health. I mean, a lot of us have had adverse child experiences. It's like, who hasn't? But to make that connection, right? To see, okay, well, how did growing up without a father, or growing up without a mother, or an abusive father, or abusive mother, neglectful parents, right? Certain attachment styles that you've had with certain caregivers in your family, growing up with that, how has that shaped who you are? That to me is a conversation for the elite. And when I say educated, I'm not saying, oh, you have to have a degree to be elite. I'm just saying that you are informed. You can educate yourself, right? You are aware. Those are conversations for people of the elite. The elite are people who are self-aware. You have to be attuned to who you are as a person. People study so many other things, and they have their phones in their hand, everything outside of them. But when it comes to you asking them about themselves, a common answer you'll hear from people is, oh, I don't know why I do that. I just do it. Well, you should know why you do it, right? Wouldn't you want to know why you do something? That means they lack self-awareness. That is important. I was thinking about this as I was taking a shower before I began this video, how, of course, I look up to Dr. Umar Johnson. He's a very prominent school psychologist based out of Pennsylvania, and he's talked openly about his diagnosis of ADHD. Now, this is a grown-ass man, right? And I know ADHD is commonly associated with children, right? Hyperactive children, especially boys. But he, I think, was formally diagnosed. Now, think about me. I admit, I haven't really been diagnosed with, I would say, severe mental illness or nothing like that. Like, bipolar would be severe, but I also made the joke online, right? How there are some bipolars, a lot of bipolars give other bipolars a bad reputation. I don't think, some people got the inside joke and some people didn't. I made this statement on my post like several years ago. That was hilarious. But I don't know. I think he said he was formally diagnosed, or diagnosed himself. Thinking about studying psychology, and psychopathology. You can diagnose yourself. I made that joke too before in one of my other videos when I was in Atlanta, Georgia. But I like his openness in talking about it. I do think, however, he lacks the insight to make the connection to, well, he maybe he has the insight, right? And maybe he has made that connection privately within his own private self and space, but he hasn't obviously done it publicly. To talk about how the symptoms of ADHD correlate to the issues he's having with opening this school, right? How he is going about managing the funds, tracing back before he purchased the school, right? How he just was sitting on this money, and people feel he was mismanaging and still is mismanaging the funds, right? But you can kind of see the connection, and I made this comment, I think, once before in another video. It makes sense though, right? Like, if you have issues with attention, when you can kind of see it play out in his talks, like in his videos. He's a very smart man, very intuitive man, very well articulated. That's why he's a very prominent, internationally known public speaker. But yeah, you can tell, like, the attention, and it's like all over the place. It's just scattered. And when it comes to organizational skills, right, like the higher functioning of our brain, the executive functioning, I think ADHD negatively impacts that, right? And being able to make these kind of higher order decisions in an organized way, in an effective, efficient way, so that you can get things done, right? You can be more productive with your time. Now, he has a lot on his plate too, so not to undermine that he's a busy man. He does lectures, he does free consultations to parents of children who have behavioral problems or cognitive issues. You know, his time and attention are kind of spread thin in a sense, so that makes sense too. But for a person who is held to high regard, and he has such responsibility, and who has raised and collected so much money from people, we're talking about $750,000, probably even more than that at this point now. There is a degree of accountability that is being, expected from him, right? And is being kind of imposed upon him by the black community. Something has to be done, right? Like, he's promising this school, and he's even stated, like, dates that, we're going to buy the school by this point. The school is going to be open. He's telling his donors, parents who are expected to send their children there, to his school, but meanwhile, it's just like, it's still not open, right? And I think a lot of it is linked to his difficulty in managing his symptoms, right? Because we know that, okay, a person can be self-aware and have a diagnosis, right? A DSM diagnosis of a mental illness. But if it's untreated, it's untreated. You have to treat it. You have to get help for it. There's many different therapeutic interventions that are effective, that are non-evasive, that can help improve the quality of a person's life in many different ways, especially when it comes to productivity as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, right? Like, you held with this high responsibility of opening this private school for children, and it's just sitting there kind of collecting dust. It's a tax liability that he incurred, which he didn't really have to incur if he had registered it under a certain type of entity, but he didn't do that, and so he's like stacked high in property taxes for the school out in Delaware. And it's just one problem stacking on top of the other, to the point where his way of approaching the problem is more problematic, right? It's like contributing to the problem, right? The way you approach issues, especially if they're like smaller, if you're avoiding it, which that's kind of been his approach, kind of avoiding, then tied into his personality disposition of, I mean, hate to call people in power narcissistic, right? It's like kind of catch-all cliche assumption that we make for people within those positions, but you can see it like played out, right? We've heard like him repeatedly, the way he talks, things that he says, it points towards narcissistic behavior. It's one thing to esteem yourself high, right, and have confidence and high self-esteem, but sometimes it can be taken a bit too far, where it's like grandiose, and it's not serving you well, right? It's counterproductive to the progress that you're trying to make. And so he's not willing to take advice from people. He's not willing to bring on a team of people to help manifest this vision that he's been given. Like, you can't do things by yourself, but if you have this idea about yourself, like, I'm God and I'm God's gift to the black community and I can do it everything by myself, and that becomes problematic. You know, those are false perceptions that he has that, yes, can be addressed in the context of therapy. But is he going to therapy? No. So people like myself, you know, sit back and watch, you observe, you know, kind of the shit show happening. It's entertainment, but it's also informational. Like, it tells you a lot about just human behavior. He's a prime example of how a person's unchecked mental illness can negatively impact not only their quality of life, but, I mean, can be an obstacle when it comes to the community at large, or if you're talking about uniting and building, nation building. So I've said a lot here. I'm looking at this nice pamphlet that I received yesterday. I actually went to the screening of The Quest for Sleep. Funny enough, though, it's funny how I come across events, and I was telling a friend this, a colleague this at work, how like I just stumbled across this where I was invited to attend the screening of this new movie called Masters, and then when I went to register for it, it was full, right? And they wanted me to sign up for the waiting list. I'm like, nah, ain't no way. This is New York. If it's full, it's full. So I was a bit discouraged by that, but then I'm self-motivated. I was like, well, that's just one screening. Let me see what else is out there. So I Googled free screenings in New York after that, and then, I came across so much on what's it called? Eventbrite. This is one of them. And I did this yesterday, right, on my way to work, and it's just like, look, this is nice. Now, when I saw the title, I'm like, The Quest for Sleep. And then I saw that it was a documentary. I'm like, oh, it's a documentary. Could be interesting. I love documentaries. That's like my favorite genre of film. And then I saw it was narrated by Octavia Spencer. I'm like, okay, shit gotta be good, right? And then I saw there was a Q&A, and this is a premiere here in New York. I was just like, okay. This was yesterday. So this was yesterday. I went to this. I think it was on 23rd Street. And, this is a very profound documentary, shall I say, right? And it's all about sleep. People who have sleep insomnia. And it kind of follows the journey of, I don't know how many people it was, maybe 8 different people who have professions, right? They work in different, like, nursing, and this one guy, I think, was from Costa Rica, and he was like into environmentalism and giving back to the planet. It's very, like, high position, and he suffers from insomnia. And it's interesting how these, like, insomnia, like, kind of ties into what we're talking about here, how there's a stigma on certain mental illnesses. People don't talk about it, and so they go about and live their life as if nothing is wrong, right? Meanwhile, they're not getting sufficient sleep, right? So they may sleep for 2 hours a night, if that, may not get any sleep at all, but then they still are expected to go to work and perform high and wear this coat, this face, like, oh, hi, how are you doing? I'm doing fine, nothing is wrong, like, but they're not getting sufficient sleep. And so it's a well put together documentary. They had psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, a sleep epidemiologist there, just different people from different professions within medicine and mental health to contribute their perspective on this pervasive, significant illness, right? And what I liked about it was that one of the subjects in the documentary whose life they follow, like in the Q&A, he mentioned how there is a connection between, or was it a she? She mentioned how, like, yeah, it was a black woman. There's a lot of diversity here too in this documentary, but she mentioned how she wonders, and for her to say that, like, she wonders how her lack of sleep manifested as an adult is linked to something in her own childhood, right? What that is she has to explore that. That's the whole point of therapy. Therapy will help you navigate that to gain a better sense of who the hell are you and why are you and how are you, right? What makes you. But she said in the Q&A, I wonder, like, what is it about my childhood that kept me awake? Because these issues that manifested now, they're adults, right? They have insomnia, is linked back. You know, this is not something that just pop up and boom, they got insomnia. No, this has an etiology to it, right? It stems from something. And she tied it back. She was like, I wonder, what is it? Like, something in my childhood that kept me awake. And then it just kind of carried over. And then the hosts of the panel were asking, like, there was a writer and the director of the film, the documentary was, you know, the host asking the panelists questions with the Q&A, and he said, well, you know, what are you guys doing individually to work through this issue? And I like the response. It felt like majority of the people on the panel didn't have much insight into why, or not that they didn't have insight, but they just felt disempowered, right? They kind of attributed the locus of control more so to external factors beyond their control, right? Which is not really that appealing, especially when it comes to the context of mental well-being. No. Granted, yes, there are a lot of factors outside of us, right? The way our society is shaped, the demand to work hard, to produce high, right? 40-hour work week and all of that. That could create a type of individual who is high stress, high anxiety, you know, not getting adequate sleep, poor diet, poor exercise, all of that, right? But then at some point, like, society, right, these big industries, the food industry, McDonald's, and you know, we can blame all these other industries, or it's their fault. They just keep producing all this unhealthy food, and the commercials on TV and the shows, like, they showing us all these things, but you're consuming it. So at some point you have responsibility, right? Yes, you work for a company, has certain high expectations and demands, but you took that job though, right? So it's just like bringing the locus of control back to self, to realize that no, you are in control of your own life. This is your life. Who else is going to take care of you but you? You have to do this. You have to make certain conscious decisions. You have to do it. And there was another important point that was made. I think a guy, he was like, yeah, just looking, what did he say? Besides her, who said, it was the white guy, I think he was like talking about, like, interpersonally. I forget what he said. It'll come back to me. But those two people on the panel, those two subjects who were part of this documentary, they seem to have, like, a greater sense of empowerment, self-empowerment, whereas the other ones is like, well, I ain't got no hope, like, what can be done? And that's sad when you get to that point where you feel powerless. And they're looking to the who was she? Was she the psychiatrist, Russian lady? They're looking to her, yeah, psychiatrist, Dr. Mita Singh, psychiatrist and sleep medicine specialist. She was also on the panel too, sitting next to the writer-director. And they're looking to her like she's God. Like, give us answers. Like, what can we... And it's funny because she's like, well, I feel so much pressure, because they're asking like, okay, how can you provide hope for these people, They were a part of the documentary and they felt like they purpose in being a part of it, but yet they still have sleep insomnia. I just think that it also comes with the level of self-awareness and intelligence and reflection to see that the answer was there, right? And I read one of the reviews here on this documentary where they said the documentary is good. Like they follow the lives of people who are very transparent, open, talking about, their struggle with sleep. They took cameras into these people's house, followed them in their home, in their workplace. You got to see what their life looked like up close and personal. But then part of the review at the end that they said, and this is on their website, the person complains that, oh, well, the documentary doesn't really offer solutions. It's like, the bulk of the documentary is like showcasing the struggle, and what the disease looks like, from a more personable, approach, being able to see into their lives, and also from a scientific approach, because I like that part too, how they actually delve deep into the science of sleep, and we got to see parts of the brain and how their sleep wake cycles and the different neurochemicals in the brain that activate sleep versus wake. They talked about all of that. I like that part. There's terminology, there's words for these chemicals that activate sleep, like what makes us fall asleep. They mentioned like the melatonin that we have in our brain. The funny thing, all this is like connected to outside though. Like sometimes we forget to mention how what's happening in our brain has a connection to the outside world. That's why it's important to be in tune. And that's why you see people who are self-aware, spiritualists, they get in tune with nature. The frequency, the vibrational waves of this magnetic pull in the world that we live in, this earth realm. Some people are very disconnected from that, right? They're very connected and in tune to making money and getting that hustle, right? But they lack connection with the very thing that really sustains us and keeps us alive and well. The sun. People underestimate the importance of just being connected to the sun. It's a life force. It's energy. When people like myself start talking like this, people look at us like we're crazy. But it's like, if you know, right? Like when you know something, you know it, right? Because you're attuned, you're connected. Some people just, they don't know. And seeing how, yes, a lot of it stems back to certain events that happen in their life, life-changing events. Like one lady talked about the birth of her child and how her sleep was forever changed as a result of that, because she would be hyper focused and very anxious, like when her child was up as a first-time mother, just trying to make sure she's doing everything right and responding to her child in an appropriate response time. If her child cries at night, need food or diaper change or whatever, comfort, connection, and she would just be up all night and her sleep pattern was disrupted. So I like how they delved into this issue from a scientific perspective to see that we're all kind of wired, like at our core, we're all wired, designed a certain way. That's the core of it, right? The scientific baseline of understanding the sleep. But then on top of that, it's like individual choices and lifestyles and experiences that we've gone through that also can disrupt. And it's just like, once it does, you reshape your chemistry. You reshape, your DNA in a sense, the environment, right? Environmental experiences, things that you have control over, or even things within your environment that maybe you don't have control over, but you're responding to, does shape your DNA. And if that's happened, your DNA has been shaped this way for so many years, right? Since childhood, or since the birth of a child, or a traumatic event. It's going to take time to, restructure that DNA, right? In the practice of different interventions and mindfulness techniques, where you're reshaping your biology, your DNA. But it takes practice and discipline, which a lot of people lack, and it's easier to just kind of go down the path that you've always been going down, even though you know that it's not healthy, right? It's not serving you well, but it's easier than it is to change, because change is difficult. So I feel like I said enough, but yeah, I like this. I like that they were bold enough to talk about their experiences with insomnia, though I would say 80% of them felt hopeless about what can be done about it. It's just like, it is what it is, because they've been living that way for years. So that is the norm for them. Not sleeping is a norm. But then a few of them were like, yeah, they felt more like internal locus of control, that they can do something to make those conscious changes in their lifestyle. And they just had more self-awareness. So I like that. It was very inspiring. This was a premiere. It's funny enough, like yesterday I actually got invited to participate in a documentary myself, to talk about my experience as a Black PhD graduate. But I'm debating, because I'm like, that kind of conflicts with what I'm already doing anyway, right? I already have my story slated for release as a book and a documentary and a feature film. This is not made up. I have it. I've written it down. Like, a lot of people know I've been to film school. I have this shit laid out, scripts and all of that. It's just doing it. And I've spoken with my colleague to say, well, of course, I'm passionate about this work, mental health, being a psychologist. But I'm also an artist and very expressive. And I want to do that. I'm going to do that. I can do both. Though what I'm doing now is very time consuming. Because I'm working towards licensure. So I am working full time, getting hours towards that. And I'll be taking my licensure exam soon. I've been studying relentlessly. That exam is a beast, but I believe I will pass on the first go around. I am going to pass. I have no choice but to. So yeah, it's funny that I told one of my supervisors that I plan to, not my current supervisor, but my previous one, when I was doing my pre-doc internship. She was like, what do you want to do? I was like, I have so many things I want to do. It may sound neurotic, but yeah, that's just me. I'm not limited to, just working a 9 to 5. I, in fact, never envision myself working a 9 to 5. That's just the facts, okay? I'm doing this because I'm developing my career as a psychologist. I don't see myself like clocking in, working a 9 every day. It's just that routine. That seems like that will lead to depression. I need like spontaneity. I need a variety. My career, my profession, what I do has to be like very diverse. I can't just be doing the same shit every day, and I work for the state. And so you have people that have worked for the state, been there for like I've been there for 8 years, 10 years, 20 years. And yes, the benefits are good. It's retirement, right? But they're planning on retiring and putting in 10 more years and get their retirement. Fuck that, okay? I want to travel. I was telling my former supervisor this, like, I want to travel. I see myself making documentaries. I see myself doing consultations and doing interviews on TV, and yeah, like just being more dynamic as a person, more or less, even as a psychologist. And so yeah, that's me. So I want to open up this discussion on talking about mental health because we're all impacted by it. You guys, and I admit, you guys see me, I get on here and I can talk because I recognize I have phases of, call it manic, right, mania. Just all this energy. And it just goes on and on and on. And I express that in different ways. I make videos, I create content. I'm looking at the art, so many art pieces I've created since I've moved here in this place. In 2020, 2 years ago, like, I walk a lot throughout the city. This is how I deal with this burst of energy that comes from, possibly they call it imbalance, but who knows? Maybe it's supposed to be that way, right? They talk about people with schizophrenia and, you know, the dopamine hypothesis, and well, what if perhaps it's supposed to be more dopamine? Like, who's to say, right? Was a surplus or not enough? You know, maybe it's just, that's how I look at it. How I come to terms with it. We're not all made to be the exact same. It's just a matter of how you deal with it, right? I think I've always had this. Like, it's inherited, you know. I said that, you know. It's just certain characteristics, DNA. It's just our makeup comes a lot from our parents and is expressed in our behavior, interactions with other people. On that note, I'm tired. I'm about to call my dad. You guys, share your comments below on this. Let's continue the discussion. Maybe one day we can do this in person and talk about it. And it's funny, like, I remember, which video was it? This was back in Atlanta. But I was going back to when I made the joke about I could diagnose myself. And I said, who knows? I may have, I don't know, bipolar, schizophrenia. Who cares? That's like the diagnoses themselves carry so much stigma that people don't want to identify with that. That's like when I do my response videos to you guys who endorse alternative sexual lifestyles like cuckolding, homosexuality, or whatever the fuck you into, right? It's you. But some people are reluctant to identify themselves with certain labels because the label itself carries so much bad stuff with it, like black, for example. Just black race. I don't want to be black. Some people say that, so I get it. You don't have to definitely claim anything. Some people don't even claim physical diagnoses, even if it came from like a skilled, well-known physician. They're like, no, I don't have cancer. Or cancer doesn't have me. I don't have cancer. Cancer has me. I forget how they go. I remember someone used to say that. On that note, I'm about to get me some food. I have not eaten yet, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. I actually got something planned for this evening. I'll come back and talk to you guys about that. Love you guys. I have fun talking about this. I don't know about you guys, but I love it. Love you guys.